Okay, so chapter 11 of the Leviathan, Hobbes continues with a lot of the points that we were just talking about there in the context of the discussion of chapter 10. So chapter 11 of the differences of manners. So he starts off, by manners, I mean not here decency of behavior, as how one man should salute another, or how a man should wash his mouth or pick his teeth before company, and other such points of the small morals, but those qualities of mankind that concern their living together in peace and unity. So, kind of typical, very funny Hobbesian opening. He says, by manners, I don't mean, should you blow your nose in front of somebody, or, should you pick your teeth or something in front of company. He means, no, I'm not talking about small morals, how to behave, what Emily Post type of stuff. I'm talking about, as he puts it, those qualities of mankind that concern their living together in peace and unity. So the really important differences of manners that make some people able to get along, able to coexist peacefully, and others not. And so he goes on, after establishing that he's not going to talk about whether or not you should, pick your teeth or whatever. He says, to which end we are to consider that the felicity of this life consisteth not in the repose of a mind satisfied. For there is no such finis ultimus, utmost aim, nor summum bonum, greatest good, as is spoken of in the books of the old moral philosophers. So here clearly Hobbes presenting himself as an innovator, as somewhat revolutionary, as someone who sort of has new ideas, breaking with the old moral philosophers of the past. He says, there is no ultimate aim or no greatest good for human beings. Old moral philosophers, Aristotle, Aquinas, people who followed them, talked about these types of things, but Hobbes says there is no such thing. He says, nor can a man any more live whose desires are at an end than he whose senses and imaginations are at a stand. Felicity is a continual progress of the desire from one object to another, the attaining of the former being still but the way to the latter. So Hobbes says, felicity is a continual progress of the desire from one object to another, and when you get something that you want, it's simply the means to something new. You really want a particular job, you get that job, and then you shortly start thinking about, well, now how can I use this to get a better job, or how else is this job useful to me? You buy a house and you're happy, but you immediately start thinking, well, what's the resale value? Should I resell it? Should I move somewhere else? Should I do this? Hobbes says, that there's nothing that you get and you just rest content with. And again, Hobbes says that's in human nature. That's simply what human beings are. It doesn't involve particular goods, but not other goods. He says that it's always that way. So he says, the cause whereof is that the object of a man's desire is not to enjoy once only, and for one instant of time, but to assure forever the way to his future desire. So, in other words, the reason for this, he says here, is because you don't want to just enjoy once, but to enjoy forever. Therefore, you constantly have to think of how to secure yourself in the future, how to get what you want in the future. It's not enough just to enjoy today. We're not, like animals that can just eat something and then take a nap and be content with that. Hobbes says we think into the future, we're worried about the future, and we think, well, how am I going to secure myself in the future? How am I going to continue to be happy in the future, a week from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, 30 years from now when I retire? What's going to happen? And so he says, therefore the voluntary actions and inclinations of all men tend not only to the procuring, but also to the assuring of a contented life, and differ only in the way, which ariseth partly from the diversity of passions in diverse men, and partly from the difference of the knowledge or opinion each one has of the causes which produce the effect desired. So he says, everybody is trying to do this, everyone is trying to secure themselves into the future. People do it differently, but he says this has to do with different passions of human beings, and also different knowledge or opinion each one has. If one person gambles a lot, Hobbes says it's not that they enjoy the rush and the thrill, and they like the idea of losing everything or something. Hobbes says they're actually trying to secure themselves. It's just based on their passion, or just based on their poor understanding. They think that gambling is the way to do that. They'll make a huge win in gambling, and then they'll be set for life. And Hobbes says, they're doing the same thing as the person who gets an accounting degree and goes off and works as an accountant and runs spreadsheets and so on for the rest of their life. He says both of them are doing the exact same thing. One may seem very exciting, one less exciting, but Hobbes says both of them are just trying to secure themselves in the future. It's just the difference is based not on the fact that they're pursuing different ideas about how they should live, or that one of them doesn't care about the future, doesn't care about securing himself. Hobbes says it's just a question of different passions, and again, different understandings of how things actually work. What is cause and effect? If I want to be secure in the future, what's the best way to do that? Get a job and work steadily, or gamble all my money. I mean, it's different people have different ideas about what's going to work. Doesn't mean that they're equally right or equally likely to be true, but they have different ideas. So Hobbes continues in the second paragraph. He says, so that in the first place I put for a general inclination of all mankind a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceaseth only in death. So again, general inclination, all human beings, perpetual and restless desire of power after power that stops only with death. So human beings constantly seeking more, constantly seeking a new power, because again, constantly knowing in the future. Right now I'm doing fine, but what about the future? How can I secure myself in the future? Only if I keep acquiring power, only if I keep, securing myself, gaining the ability to get what I want. And again, having it today doesn't mean that I'll have it in the future, so I have to keep pursuing that. So he goes on, he says, and the cause of this is not always that a man hopes for a more intensive delight than he has already attained to, or that he cannot be content with a moderate power. So he says it's not necessarily that they're just pursuing really intense delights, or that they're super ambitious, that they can't be content with a moderate power, but because he cannot assure the power and means to live well, which he hath present, without the acquisition of more. So again, even if you're perfectly content with what you have, Hobbes says you can't think that you'll be able to have that in the future without continuing to acquire, without continuing to have power and to have the ability to maintain this standard of living, this security, these things that you have right now that you're content with. And he says, he uses the example of kings. He says their power is the greatest. If anybody should rest content, it should be kings. But he says they first of all they assure their power at home by laws and abroad by wars. So he says a king who you might think would be the most secure, the best able to just rest content and enjoy the fact that he's the king and so on. Hobbes says no, actually the first thing they do is make legal reforms. They try to solidify and assure their power domestically through laws, and abroad through wars. They start to say, who are my threats? What other countries, what other kings are a threat to me? And they go and they try to attack those, or they make alliances to prevent themselves from being attacked. So he says the first thing they do is try to secure their power. They don't just enjoy it. They don't just say, hey, everything's fine right now. They try to secure it. And then he says when that's done, as he puts it, there succeedeth a new desire, in some of fame from new conquest, in others of ease and sensual pleasure, in others of admiration or being flattered for excellence in some art or other ability of the mind. So he says some new desire then takes over, even when they've secured themselves against enemies, against domestic unrest and so on. Once they've secured themselves, then he says, again, they don't just sit there on their throne and say, oh, this is so great, I'm the king now, and everything is secure, and I can be content and I can just rest now. Something new happens. Either they want fame from a new conquest, or they decide to devote themselves to ease and sensual pleasure, or where they decide they want to be admired and maybe flattered for excellence in some art or other ability of the mind. So maybe they study, maybe they practice, maybe they learn and play an instrument themselves. Maybe they're patrons of the arts. But Hobbes says even when things are totally content, people, again, they keep on desiring. They don't just rest content with that. They want new things, either fame from conquest, or fame for being a great patron of the art, or even a great piano player or something, or they just decide to devote themselves to physical pleasure and so on. But Hobbes says, no one just stops. You don't just stop desiring and rest content. Okay, again, so he sort of says here again, there is no ultimate end, there is no ultimate goal, there is no ultimate good for human beings, which once human beings reach that, we just stop and we just relax and we're content. Hobbes says, constantly seeking after power, first of all, just to secure ourselves into the future. But then again, he says the example of kings, the kings, even when they do secure themselves, even when through laws, through wars with enemies and so on, or potential enemies, they've totally secured themselves, then he says they focus on something else. They start to pursue something else, either conquest and fame through that, or just ease and physical pleasure, or good reputation for being good at the arts and so on. But he says people constantly want something new. They're constantly desiring some new thing, some new good. And again, he says there is no ultimate good. It's not, so comparing him with Aquinas. For Aquinas, it's sort of roughly the situation with the human good is sort of roughly analogous to the situation with the body. Some things are objectively, really genuinely good for you to eat, for instance. Some things are really healthy, some things really are not. You might greatly enjoy eating things that aren't healthy, but the fact that you enjoy them, the fact that they give you pleasure, the fact that they seem good to you, doesn't make them actually good. If you're eating a lot of very fatty food, that is bad for your heart. No matter how much you enjoy it, no matter how good that food seems to you, it is really harming you. whether you realize it or not. Aquinas says it's the same with the good. Some things are genuinely good, and some things are only apparently good. And the things that are apparently good, but not actually good, in fact, actually harmful, Aquinas says if you pursue those things, if you devote yourself to those things, they will ultimately harm you. They will ultimately make you unhappy. Hobbes, so for Aquinas, there's the true good, the apparent good. Pursuing the true good makes you happy. Pursuing the apparent or pursuing false goods, things that seem good but really are not, make you unhappy. Just like eating really healthy food makes you healthy, and eating unhealthy food makes you unhealthy, even if it tastes good, even if it seems good to you. Hobbes would sort of reject that. He would say, no, they're sort of only the good, again, is only how it seems to a particular person, and how the good seems to a particular person constantly changes. Therefore, people are always pursuing new things. And therefore, he says, again, that's who human beings are. They're constantly striving. They constantly want more. They're constantly seeking new power, either just to secure what they have, to feel secure in the future, or if they feel completely secure, then they start to pursue new things. So different types of things that people might go after and try to attain and want for themselves and so on. He sort of talks about that next. He says, what types of goods? So again, he says, this chapter on manners, people living together, the qualities that make people live together or not. So what types of things do people pursue that lead to conflict, and what types of things do people pursue that lead to peace? And he says competition for various goods, honor, things like that, necessarily lead people to competition and so to conflict. Certain things like honor, riches, command, as he puts it, some things are just inherently competitive. If everybody has them, then nobody has them. If everybody is honored, then no one really has honor. That's the whole point of honor, is being, part of what honor is, part of why people desire honor, is because it means to be, respected more than other people. That's what it is. So Hobbes says, things like that necessarily need to lead to competition and therefore to conflict. Whereas he says desire for ease and sensual delight obviously leads people to obey a common power, as he puts it, because if you want a restful, relaxed life to be at ease and physical pleasure and so on, then obviously you need a relatively stable society. If you're constantly fighting, that's not going to work. So people who are drawn to physical pleasure want peace. Therefore, they're likely to obey the government. People who want honor and who are ambitious and so on, they're much more likely to fight the government, because again, the things that they want, they can't necessarily get by simply obeying. Whereas Hobbes says desire for ease and sensual delight, and also desire for knowledge. He says, again, desire if you want to learn a lot, if you want to know a lot, that will also make you more obedient, more likely to obey the law, because again, you can't learn very much, you can't gain very much knowledge, at least not the kind of knowledge that you probably want if you're living through a civil war, if society breaks down, if you're constantly fighting and subject to violence and so on. So some things, incline you to obey the sovereign, a common power, and therefore to sort of, hope that you have a peaceful, stable society. And as he goes on, again, some more interesting kind of classic Hobbesian bits of psychology. He says in paragraph 7, or section 7, he says, in being indebted to an equal, he says, as he puts it, I'll just read it, section 7. To have received from one to whom we think ourselves equal greater benefits than there is hope to requite, disposeth to counterfeit love, but really secret hatred, and puts a man into the estate of a desperate debtor, that in declining the sight of his creditor tacitly wishes him there, where he might never see him more. Well, where would that be? He tacitly, secretly wishes him to be someplace where he would never have to see him again, maybe dead and so on. But basically he says, so to receive credit, to receive some kind of a benefit from someone we think is our equal, greater than we can hope to repay. So if you're at a coffee shop with a friend and you realize you forgot your wallet, and the friend loans you $5 and you buy a cup of coffee, that doesn't make you hate them. You can just pay them back $5 the next time you see them. But he says great benefits, greater than you can hope to receive. If somebody saves your life, Hobbes says, you will actually, it will, as he puts it, it will dispose you to counterfeit love, but really secret hatred, because you will hate the feeling of indebtedness. Basically, you will be indebted, and now that person is basically superior. They were your equal, but now you're indebted to them in a way that you can never hope to pay back, and therefore Hobbes says you will come to hate them. if you're about to be ruined financially, and someone who you thought was your equal comes in, and it turns out that they have all this money that they've saved through their own working and so on, and they give you that money and they save you, Hobbes says you will hate that person because you can never hope to pay them back. So again, he says, counterfeit love, but really secret hatred, and you wish that they would be someplace where you'd never have to see them again. Now, he doesn't necessarily mean that you would kill them, but again, he's basically saying you will start to avoid them. You might be very good friends with someone, but if that person saves your life, Hobbes says, in most cases, you will then start to avoid them because you really don't like that feeling of indebtedness. And again, this is another place where students frequently disagree. They say that's not true, I wouldn't do that, and so on. But Hobbes is saying again, feeling of equality, when that is totally ripped away and suddenly someone who was your equal you become indebted to them in some kind of profound way, Hobbes says that makes you hate them and you just don't want to see them anymore. Now, notice he says again equals. So most people obviously are very indebted to their parents, but he says, well, that's not really the same thing because obviously you weren't equals when you were born. You were a baby. Your parents were adults. If there are very clear permanent social differences, so if an aristocrat, as aristocrats did, help sponsor some of Hobbes' work, that didn't make him hate them because they were clearly not equals socially or financially. But again, he says being indebted to an equal makes you hate them. Being indebted in some way that you can't hope to repay, Hobbes says, doesn't make you love them, doesn't make you impressed with their generosity. It makes you hate them because now they are no longer your equal, they're your superior, and you're indebted to them. He goes on and he says then harming another makes you hate him. Again, if you step on somebody's foot on the subway or something, you say excuse me and that's it. But if you really sort of if you run over somebody in the parking lot and paralyze them, and now they're sort of paralyzed for life, Hobbes says that will make you hate that person because you expect either revenge or forgiveness, and he says both of them are hateful. So obviously, if this person is going to get their revenge and paralyze you or kill you or something, well, then you're not looking forward to that. So that will make you hate him. You don't want to have anything to do with the person because of that. But he says revenge is also hateful because again, revenge, when is it clear that someone else has power over you than when you have to ask for their forgiveness? And when they grant that forgiveness, it's clear that there's a clear power differential. And again, Hobbes says, some things, if you harm somebody bad enough, in a sense, you can never really, they can say that they forgive you, but that's always going to remain. Just like if someone benefits you enough and you can never hope to repay it. So in the same way, if you harm somebody badly enough, even if they say that they forgive you, ultimately that's always there, that you did that, and therefore, again, he says forgiveness is ultimately hateful because again, it indicates this clear difference of power. It indicates that in fact you are not equals. Again, these are some of the passages that people oftentimes have real trouble with Hobbes, and people say that's not true. I wouldn't, I would feel guilty, but I wouldn't hate the person. If they forgive me, I would be relieved. I wouldn't be hateful. But Hobbes again is saying this is what people are really like. Okay, and then at the end of the chapter, then he talks about the natural seed of religion. Where does religion come from? So he says basically ignorance of natural causes, as he puts it in section 23, disposeth a man to credulity. So if you don't genuinely understand what causes are from nature, if you don't understand the actual natural causes of things, he says, then that will make you credulous, disposed to believe things. So he says, as he says, disposeth a man to credulity, so as to believe many times impossibilities. For such know nothing to be contrary, but that they may be true. For such know nothing to the contrary, but that they may be true, being unable to detect the impossibility. So he says, if you don't understand nature, you'll believe almost anything that you're told about where things come from. And so he says, incredulity, because men love to be hearkened unto in company, disposeth them to lying, so that ignorance itself without malice is able to make a man both to believe lies and tell them, and sometimes also to invent them. So he says, because people love to be believed, if they realize they're talking to someone who will believe anything, then they'll just start making things up. Not necessarily because they're malicious, not necessarily because they hope to gain anything from the person by lying to them, other than just feeling important, being listened to, and so on. So he says, that this is part of where it comes from. So he says, if you don't understand natural causes, you'll believe what you're told. And he goes on in section 24 and says, anxiety for the future time disposeth men to inquire into the causes of things, because the knowledge of them maketh men the better able to order the present to their best advantage. So anxiety about the future. Again, human beings can see into their, not see into the future, magically or anything, but human beings are aware of the future, unlike other animals. He says this in a few different places. Animals, they have their kind of immediate physical needs, and when they're satisfied, then they just, forget about them. They just lay down and take a nap. Human beings understand the future. We think about the future, and we're anxious about the future. We're worried about the future. Today I'm okay, but what's going to happen in the future? What's going to happen to the crops? What's going to happen? Are we going to have a drought? What's going to happen to my health? I mean, today, obviously, we might still worry about our health. Today, we maybe don't worry as much about the drought and so on because we have irrigation and whatnot. But especially, in Hobbes' day and even before Hobbes' day, when people were very much at the mercy of, say, the weather, they might be very anxious about that. Well, what happens if there's a hurricane? What happens if there's an earthquake? And again, some of these things we might still worry about today. And Hobbes says, anxiety about these things makes us wonder what causes these things. How can we set things up now in the present so that in the future they'll be most advantageous to us? Again, anxiety makes us seek into the causes. Now he says there is a kind, again, he sort of here admits that there is a kind of curiosity, a kind of natural desire to know, which may lead people to seek understanding of causes, and they may eventually reason in an argument here that somewhat like Aquinas, they may eventually realize and come through reflecting on the nature of causes and so on, that there must be some first cause and that's God. But basically, he says, that's sort of that. In many ways, that's the exception. Yes, there is this kind of love of thinking, love of understanding causes, which may lead people to come to believe in God himself, although again, it's kind of God as a first cause, not necessarily the God of the Bible. He doesn't really mention here, God through revelation and so on. But then he goes on in section 26, he says, and they that make little or no inquiry into the natural causes of things, yet from the fear that proceeds from the ignorance itself of what it is that hath the power to do them much good or harm, are inclined to suppose and feign unto themselves several kinds of powers invisible. And then as he kind of sarcastically puts it, and to stand in awe of their own imaginations, and in time of distress to invoke them, as also in the time of unexpected good success to give them thanks, making the creatures of their own fancy their gods. So he says, though people who have very little inquiry and who make little or no inquiry into the natural causes of things, but again, fear precedes. What's going to happen in the future? Am I going to get sick? Are the crops going to be successful? Are we going to be attacked by a more powerful enemy that we don't even know about right now? Anxiety about the future among people who haven't bothered to inquire into the actual natural causes, Hobbes says it makes them imagine things. And so go on to say, it's sort of, as he says sort of a little bit later in his discussion of religion, human beings sort of, if we don't understand where our good and evil fortune comes from, Hobbes says it's sort of an uncertainty that human beings can't really tolerate. We need something, as he puts it, to accuse either of our good or of our evil fortune. As the note explains, he says accuse what means, kind of attribute. We need to think that there's some kind of a source that we can understand. So Hobbes says if we don't know the genuine causes of illness, for instance, then we imagine things. We create powers invisible. Basically gods, spirits, things that have these powers that we can't see, but that we understand something caused me to get sick. What was it? If we don't understand actual natural causes, we imagine something. We imagine a god or a spirit or something that for some reason has made us sick. As he puts it, they stand in awe of their own imaginations. They invent these powers invisible, and then they stand in awe of them. They have these religious experiences about these things that they've imagined themselves. And he says, to call on them, invoke them in times of distress, and he says, making the creatures of their own fancy their gods, making things that they've imagined their gods. By which means it hath come to pass that from the innumerable variety of fancy men have created in the world innumerable sorts of gods. So different types of people, different types of imaginations. People create all kinds of different gods, as he'll talk about in chapter 12. And this fear of things invisible is the natural seed of that which everyone in himself calleth religion, and in them that worship or fear that power otherwise than they do, superstition. So again, somewhat sarcastically, he says, this is the natural seed, this is the natural origin, the natural wellspring or beginning point of that thing which everybody in themselves calls religion. What I believe is religion, what I believe is the truth, obviously, and those that worship or that fear a different power, then that's just superstition. What I believe is true, what other people believe when they disagree with me, that's just superstition. So he sort of, Hobbes kind of sarcastically makes this distinction, but again, this is sort of where it comes from. And then he goes on, he says, and this seed of religion having been observed by many, some of those that have observed it have been inclined thereby to nourish, dress, and form it into laws, and to add to it of their own invention any opinion of the causes of future events, by which they thought they should best be able to govern others and make unto themselves the greatest use of their powers. So here he kind of says at the end here, the end of chapter 11, he says, this seed of religion having been observed by many people have noticed this and understood this is the way that people are, this is the way that they think, this is what their anxiety and their fear mixed with their ignorance produces is belief in these invisible powers. And so they basically, as he puts it, nourished, dressed it, formed it into laws, basically used religion as a sort of for political purposes, used it as a way to come into laws, to govern others, and again to add to it then anything that they thought would be useful for that, and to add to it of their own invention any opinion of the causes of future events by which they thought they should best be able to govern others and make unto themselves the greatest use of their power. So again, they add to it things that they think will be especially useful for governing or for controlling others. So again, here at the end, we see this. Chapter 12 obviously is all about religion. Hobbes will expand his argument there. But the idea here again is people basically know about the future. We understand the future is uncertain. We understand bad things can happen to us. We'll take a simple example like health. Hobbes says, looking into the future, thinking about the future, we realize we don't know, again, especially without modern medicine. Think of it in his day or even long before that. People don't know, am I going to get sick? Am I going to die? Why? How are these things going to happen? What control do I have over these things? And Hobbes is just sitting there saying, I don't have any control. I'll just have to try to, go on and I die when I die. Hobbes says overall people can't accept that. Most people can't live that way. They need to think that there's some kind of a cause which they can understand and then which ultimately, hopefully, they can start to control. So they imagine these invisible powers which are causing, for instance, their health, they cause health or sickness. And then believing in these invisible powers, they start to think, are there ways that I can manipulate these powers? Are there ways that I can make them happy? If they're angry at me and they've made me sick, is there a way that I can make them stop being angry? I can, appeal to them or propitiate them or calm them down, make them happy with me again. How can I do these things? And Hobbes says, that's where religion comes from. People come up with these ideas, and they sort of, and they what they believe they call religion. What they hear other people say, well, that's, I believe in this God who is this way, and then they hear someone who, well, I believe in a different God. They say, well, that's ridiculous. Obviously, that's not true. What I believe, that's obviously true, but what you believe is ridiculous. So Hobbes says, religion. Some people call things other ideas other than the ones that they have, other than the beliefs that they have. Hobbes says they call those superstition. And he says, and then people come in and they see that, and they see why people are afraid. They see why they have these beliefs, and they start to think, if I could present myself as somehow the person who understood these powers invisible, these gods, then I could use that to really get political power, and I could use that to govern other people, to control them, to make them serve me, as the note points out. Hobbes said somewhat more sharply in Latin. In the Latin edition of Leviathan. So people come along and they start to add things, and they sort of present themselves in a particular, as they try to sort of present themselves as people who know something about these powers invisible, about how to control them, about how to influence them, and so on. And then they go ahead and they add beliefs to these belief systems that they think will help them become more powerful. So again, religion starts from this anxiety. People believe these things, and then others eventually come in and start to manipulate them and start to add their own beliefs that also, so for instance, well, there should be a priest class, and everyone should do what the priests say, and so on. Hobbes doesn't spell that out as what he's thinking about, but probably, thinking something like that, how people add to that sort of fear for the sake of controlling others. So now we'll see in chapter 12 as he sort of expands on this a little bit more.